Once there's been a sense of re-establishing some form of trust in yourself and other people, the next important step on the way to surviving after domestic violence is clarifying, making clear, getting a handle on, hearing how you communicate, both with yourself and with other people. Probably be very familiar that the communication in your previous relationship may have been quite one way at times. It may have been one way all the time, or at least the majority of the times. And so I hear a lot of people who come from situations where they find it very difficult to communicate with others. Reason being that the environmental situation they've been in hasn't had the luxury of them being able to express themselves. They haven't been able to share what they think or how they feel. They haven't been able to begin and end the same sentence for interruption. And so they're quite unaccustomed to being heard. They're quite unaccustomed at times from being listened to in any meaningful way. And as a result, they're quite shy. They can have big issues socially in terms of either not saying what's going on for them, or in a contrast sense, they may have learned that the person who yells and screams the longest and the loudest forces their opinion and position, and from doing that, therefore gets hurt. And so many outcomes come from those opposite approaches. One, of course, is that the person doesn't get included because they don't speak up and share or say what their needs are. The other, of course, is that they unwittingly can put people off because they come across as too aggressive. And so learning to communicate effectively and appropriately after domestic violence is very, very important. I use the word appropriately on purpose. The retort for some in relation to that might be, who the hell are you to define what appropriate is? In terms of communication, there are lots of videos and books and other self-help type resources out there that talk about communication, that suggest ways in which to communicate effectively and how to do that. I stick to a very simple model that says that 90% of communication is in fact about listening. And many exponents of people help type literature and resources have extolled over long periods of time beginnings, middles and endings of statements. So an introduction of what's being talked about, usually thoughts or feelings held, beliefs, etc. about those issues, and of course a deeper symbolic level informing that. So in terms of communicating, really, really important to have a sense of timing, to have a sense of getting used to being able to take part in conversations again, where you're allowed to say what you're feeling, where you're allowed to take a position or have an opinion on something without being shut down or punched out or whatever else, and where you're able to share your perspective and your experience of the world. So learning to communicate again after domestic violence is, after trust, a very, very important step. One in the sense of letting others know what's going on for you, letting your children and wider family system know how you're progressing, and of course being able to redefine boundaries again in terms of connecting with others and letting them into your world and sharing at a deeper level. And so the typical features that come out of domestic violence and communication are non-communication, are partners who have to learn to read what the other party's doing, to try and anticipate or predict what they're going to do next. And unfortunately, over time, to focus on pointers or signs that are going to tell them in some way what may follow next in terms of what the other party is saying or doing. And where there's extreme physical violence, of course, typically the outcome of that is fast and severe. The forms of communication are narrowly defined. The roles, relationship are narrowly defined. And the violence is not incidental to disagreements or arguments. The violence has moved to another place where it's instrumentally controlling. There's a holding pattern in place, and that holding pattern, a bit like a phone card, is being topped up from day to day and from week to week, because the party doing that, A, chooses to do so, and B, as a close second, often doesn't have any other modality of moving in the world. And so it's a very grey place, it's a very stuck place, and it's an experience for partners where their own confidence is undermined, where their own capacities and abilities are undermined, and where they don't get to say, express, or share what's going on in the most simple sense of the word. And so communication after leaving domestic violence relationships is very, very important. In the first instance, being in environments where you're actually allowed to relax, where you don't have to be doing anything unless you choose to be doing it, where you're not going to be interrogated at the end of the day as to what you've been doing with your time, or who you've been seeing, or where you've been, or for that matter, who came to the house, who was telephoned. A whole range of basic control strategies that the other party in the relationship has conditioned you to believe over time are an integral part, not only of relationship, but of good communication, because they tend to form a range of skills or tools that not only have you become familiar with over time and accustomed to, you've actually become, unfortunately, very comfortable with, because in a weird catch-22 type way, those unpredictable features are the only form of predictability in the house. And they typically are the prelude to the acting out of the physical violence and really become enmeshed with it. And so there's forms of communication that are being learned that tiptoe around that other party or parties. There are forms of communication that are learned which are non-verbal. There are forms of communication that placate that other party, but like feeding the monster in the cave more chocolate cake in the hope that they won't eat the village children. The outcome, of course, is often opposite, whereby the monster in the cave not only eats the cake and then the village children, they then demand more cake. And so that whole sense of placating and trying to not harm the feelings or upset the ire or the anger of the other party becomes an obsession. One, to keep safe. Two, of course, to keep children safe. And thirdly, to try and keep the peace in the house, which becomes a constant mission. So 90% of communication is about listening. And so in the first instance, that's about learning to listen to yourself. It's about having the time and space that's conducive or set up to encourage you to be able to reflect on what's going on within yourself. It's having the time and space where you can make sense of jumbled up thoughts, or hurt feelings and confusion and be able to put them out there to other people. And there may not be a lot of people, might be one or two people for a start, but that you get used to the process of being able to hear your own voice, that you get used to how you can not only use your own voice, that you've got a total choice in saying what you want to say without being shut down. And then, of course, there's the other form of communication where you're going to be exposed to from other people, where you're not being constantly blamed, constantly harangued, constantly vilified or put down. And the weird sense of freedom that comes about as a result of not having to panic or feel anxious for the larger part of the day and wondering what to do with yourself. And so part of communication in that sense becomes one of defining, these are the issues for me. I'm no longer the problem. I've been used to living with a person who called me the problem, who called me a problem, who told me that I was the fucking problem in their world, who went about bashing me and then telling me that I don't deserve any better, calling me names, swearing at me, putting me down, and then a situation where feeling hopeless and shamed out and powerless, and having an experience where I told myself that that was my lot, and those feelings are really who I am, and to get over myself. And so part of the challenge is being able to move beyond that place, is being able to know that it's okay to tell your story and you're not going to be put down, you're not going to be judged or blamed, you're not going to be beaten up or harmed. The most difficult thing you're going to have to do is listen to the depth and breadth of your own experience, that you've been living in silence, that you've been living out in isolation, and that wholly probably you've been living out without any shred of support. And so communication then is going to start with the 90% of listening to yourself, and the 10% of being able to assure yourself that what you've experienced unfortunately was real, the impacts are real, and the challenge in front of you is equally real too, and that the ability to share what's going on is going to be an integral part of the pathway to recovering for years and years of those experiences. And so by communication, there's also the sense of re-establishing boundaries, a sense of your space and other space, and appropriate ways to put across what needs are from an environment where you may have had to hide what your needs were, where you might have felt at times that you were sneaking around all the time because you couldn't reveal to the other party what you were doing for fear of getting bashed or the children getting harmed. And so communication in that sense is about being able to say, I don't need to be living in an environment of secrecy anymore. I don't need to be hiding who I am. I don't need to be hiding what I do. I don't need to be hiding what I'm thinking. I don't need to be hiding how I'm feeling. I need to develop a sense of getting used to putting those things out there and sharing them with other people. And that process is, for a start, one of acknowledging and revealing to yourself bit by bit at a time that you have experienced in actuality what's been done to you. That you can acknowledge that a little bit at a time and then put it away. Take it a little bit at a time, put it back. So we're talking about baskets of knowledge. You want to take a little bit out of the basket at a time, put it out in the light of day, acknowledge it, put it back in the basket. Next day, perhaps a little bit more or something else. Acknowledge it, put it back in the basket. The acknowledgement process in that way does a number of things. Firstly, it means that you're able to define what it is that you're going to share and how you're going to share it. Secondly, that you do that in a way which is manageable, rather than getting flooded by putting out something that's too heavy, too deep, and overwhelms your ability to cope again, or to cope at all. So it's really important to do that process bit by bit, as a process, as in how you do it. You know what's gone on, but in terms of how you share that you do that in a way where it's bit by bit by bit, so that not only will you gain confidence and familiarity in a different sense of sharing your experience, but that you also be able to do that in a way with acceptance over time. And acceptance doesn't mean that what was done was okay. Acceptance doesn't mean that you approve of what was done. Acceptance means that you acknowledge that what's been done to you, you did not ask to have done to you. What's been done to you has been forced on you without your consent. Someone else has forced their will on you. And so part of sharing dimensions of your experience bit by bit by bit, piece by piece by piece, is breaking them down into bite-sized chunks so that they're able to be managed, rather than reliving all those experiences all at once, getting flooded, becoming overwhelmed, and then reliving a sense of shame through not coping and through failing. So communicating in the first instance is about communicating within yourself. And so getting a sense of, over time, what it's like to be in an environment where people are not yelling and screaming at each other. Getting a sense of what it's like to be in an environment where you're able to walk out in the morning and it's safe for you to have breakfast with children. Getting a sense of an environment where you are able to have a cup of tea midday, or a glass of water, or a sit down. Getting a sense of an environment where you're allowed to answer the phone, use the phone. Getting a sense of an environment where you're able to have friends over to visit, where you're able to have family members over to visit, and where you're able to go out in a way that you're not being interrogated, either before you leave or when you get back, where you are allowed to leave at all. So those are big changes. They don't necessarily sound big for people who've been able to do them, because for people who've been able to do them and not dominated by another person, they are freedoms that are taken for granted. For people who have been dominated and have been controlled in the context of domestic violence, they are huge things. They're huge things, because they were incrementally taken away bit by bit by bit, step by step by step, over sometimes a short period of time, sometimes longer periods of time, in a way that how they were taken away added and reinforced to the process of how the last lot of choices were undermined, diminished, and taken away. And so, as a cumulative process, as one that's built up over time, it's sneaked up in an insidious way. And before you or I know it, you're trapped in the house, not allowed to go out of the house, not allowed to make contact with other people outside the house. And when contact is made, it's monitored, it's controlled, it's shut down altogether. And so what you've typically ended up experiencing is a life of extreme isolation, of extreme sorrow, and often of extreme depression. And so communication is really, really vital, in the sense of being able to ask the simple question, what's the issue here? And having the luxury of time and space to define that. What's the real issue going on here? Not, am I going to be blamed, or am I going to blame someone else? No. Not, whose fault is it? What's the issue going on between us here? Let's define it. Let's have a sense that males or females aren't going to perceive that issue in the same way. Let's have the sense that someone born in 1945 is not going to perceive that issue in the same way as someone born in 1960 or 1975. Let's have a sense that someone who comes from a different part of the world is not going to define that issue in the same way. Let's have a sense that someone in a same-gender relationship is not going to define that issue in the same way. And so all these factors help influence how issues in and of themselves are perceived, how they're seen, how they're defined, and then from there, how they'll work through. And that's a mile away from a domestic violence situation where there's only one accord in the household, that of the abuser. There's only one rule in the household, that of the abuser, where the patriarchal sense of control of the first rule in the house is not to question the rules in the house, is fully alive and being instituted and put in place on a day-to-day basis. So communication then of being able to focus on what the issues are and move them away from yourself as issues rather than as personalised battlefields takes on a whole new feel. Within that, there's a challenge of intimacy, because whilst it's good to put issues out in front of you and define what they are, issue this and issue that can become quite impersonal and depersonalised in a different way. So in terms of intimacy and in terms of closeness, obviously the whole what's the issue language changes over time, and rather than being stilted, becomes a lot more free-flowing. From the first instance, using language like that and concepts like that are about reforming boundaries where there haven't been any. It's also about a way in which issues or factors in your life can be worked through in a way that's logical. You can go step by step by step, and that you've got some sort of influence or control over, rather than a sense where you've been used to having everything personalised, and discussions usually quickly degenerate into mudslinging and blame, and people dumping baskets on each other or not owning their portion at all, so denial, and of course from there further violence to reinforce that old way of doing things. And so communicating and being able to define what issues are really, really important. Remembering that when you and I break down on the side of the road and you know how to fix the car and I don't, then that knowing for you, you're going to have a clear identification of what the issues are underneath the hood or bonnet. I'm not mechanically minded. So for me, because I don't know, it's quickly going to become problematic. But because I have a problem with what's going on with the vehicle, doesn't mean you automatically have to. Where I'm careful to listen to you and communicate effectively in that sense, I might learn something from you from the afternoon. In fact, I'm sure I will. And once you've fixed the issue underneath the bonnet, that for me was problematic, thank you, we'll be able to move on. And that's the form of freedom that gets afforded in terms of new communication after leaving domestic violence relationships. The other dimension within that is gaining confidence over time to get personal feedback and not treat that feedback as a personal attack, because your ego boundaries or sense of identity has been attacked and undermined over usually long periods of time. And so it can be quite challenging to get feedback from other people that's focused on what you're doing, not who you are. And so in that sense, intimacy or closeness of having personal comments made to you rather than about you, you're highly likely to benefit from once you get used to the notion that the person's saying them to help, not saying them to criticise you, put you down, judge you, attack you, or control you. So step one's in terms of communication.